Good afternoon. I'm Frank McGillen. I want to thank you for taking some time out today to talk about the impact of social media in the healthcare space. This afternoon, really want to spend time on three areas. One is, why should you care about social media? Why should you take the time to explore something on top of your already busy plates? Number two is, how do you navigate the world of social media, given the regulatory concerns in healthcare, given some of the challenges you have in terms of dealing with the legal and regulatory aspects. Finally, how do you get started? How do you get involved? How do you start looking at this for your business? So make sure you save some time for questions along the way, questions at the end, but please, let's keep it interactive throughout the discussion. So I guess the first question is really, why should you care? Why should you get involved in social media? And I think reality is people are talking about your brand online, whether you listen to them or not. So now you may be aware of this brand called Toyota that's had a little bit of problem out there of late. Some problems with braking and stopping and those kinds of things. But the interesting thing is, if you look at blog postings on brake issues with Toyotas, you start seeing those popping up much earlier than the news stories broke. I looked at some data from earlier in January of this year that showed there were 4 million postings about brake problems on Toyota Camrys. And that was just an initial search, a 5-minute search. So reality is that whether or not you're listening, whether or not you're paying attention, people are talking about your brand. And you can act like the ostrich here and pay not a heck of a lot of attention to it, in which I'd say do that at your own peril. Or you can get involved and listen to what they're saying, harness the stuff that's working for you, as well as try to address the issues that may be working against you. Second point is, customers are influencing each other. And we know in the healthcare space, peer-to-peer dynamic is the most powerful driver of sales within our healthcare space. Now, we right now do it one doctor at a time, one nurse at a time, one influencer at a time. But if you look at the power of social media, that you can use social networks online to accelerate that dynamic, holds tremendous promise. Finally, and this is something people don't think about as much when they think social media, is that customers, consumers, patients, doctors are an incredibly rich source of insight about both the categories you compete in, your products, how to innovate. And I think for us, this is one of the most interesting areas. It's one area that I personally spend a lot of time focusing on, is how do we harness that and translate that into our innovation programs moving forward. So a lot of good reasons to be looking at social media. So how do you get started? And this is the way I like to think about it, is really start with objectives and strategies first. And I'm sure many of you are hearing from folks you work with, maybe it's your boss, maybe you're reading stuff and you're like, social media is cool. We need a Twitter feed, or we need to do a Facebook page for our brand. But I always get back to, what are you trying to achieve? And based on what you're trying to achieve, let's pick the right tool. So in terms of strategy, you need to think about, what am I trying to drive? What are my objectives? Is this a loyalty drive? Am I trying to keep my current customers loyal? Trying to drive more action within the base? Am I looking at recommendations? Am I trying to get people to recommend to friends, family, and a peer dynamic? Or am I trying to build brand preference and or trial? And depending on those objectives, you may be looking at very different tools, very different techniques. Second thing that is critically important to the strategy is, who is your target audience? Now, from a social demographic standpoint, or a social media psychographic, are you dealing with the caveman at the far right, or are you dealing with a more evolved person on the far right? And a little bit of play on the evolution bit, but frankly, if your customer base isn't posting, isn't creating content, then you don't want to drive a strategy dependent on those kind of activities. But if they're reading, if they're participating, that's what could help drive an effective strategy. Finally, in terms of your strategy and tactics, what are some of the tactics that you can then drive in terms of measurement, in terms of maintaining? How do you energize your customer base? And these are all things that I want to explore today as we're talking. Now, many of you, I think, have seen some of the work that's been done by Forrester in terms of social demographics. And I think this is an incredibly powerful tool in terms of how to think about your customer audience. And it specifies and classifies people's online behavior, starting at the bottom of inactives. These are people who just aren't playing online. And if you're selling products to an 80-year-old retiree, then maybe you shouldn't be thinking about social media. But for most of us, we're talking more in this upper range, which might be a spectator, someone who reads blogs, somebody who watches videos on YouTube but isn't necessarily creating or that involved. The next step up is joiners, people who not only read, look at videos, but are also joining online networks, joining groups. There's collectors, people who are out there using social media tools, RSS feeds, and other parts and other tools to get content and feed into their work, presentations, communication they're doing every day. There's critics. These are people who are commenting on work that other people have done. So they may not be creating their own personal content, but they're commenting on work that's blog posts from experts. They are commenting on their friends' postings on Facebook. They're writing a review on a movie they saw. But they're participating on ongoing initiatives. And then finally, you've got creators. These are the people who are actually creating new content. They're writing a blog. They're posting videos on YouTube. They're actually doing editorial content. And depending on the product category you're in, the demographics vary broadly. So looking within the B2B space, you can see that the profile for the B2B space really trends heavy to the spectators. People who are there reading, taking in content. But you can also see that there's a large number of creators, critics, collectors, joiners, etc. This was a broad-based piece of research, so it doesn't tie in specifically to one of our categories. One of the things I'd recommend is that if you're really serious about making a serious investment here, is that you should do it with a specific customer base. So to do it on B2B isn't enough. We may want to look at cardiologists if we have a cardiology play, hospital administrators, because frankly it's going to vary within there. And depending on what that behavior is, tailor your strategy to that.